What if I told you that on your last fishless winter trip, the fish were actually biting all day long? You just never felt them? That's a tough pill to swallow, I know. You're out there in the freezing cold, doing everything right, and you go home with nothing to show for it. But the culprit probably isn't the fish, the lure, or the spot. It's the one thing connecting you to all of it. Today we're talking about the silent killer of cold water fishing, a line that's too damn stiff. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll look at that spool of line on your reel completely differently. I'm going to show you why your trusted, go-to line is likely betraying you when the temperature drops. Do you believe a fishing line can become your worst enemy? Let me know your initial thoughts down in the comments before we even start. Look, we all fall into routines. We spend hundreds, even thousands of dollars on sensitive rods, high-tech reels, and the perfect lures. We obsess over the details. But when it comes to line, we often just grab the same spool of line we used in July for a trip in December. It's what we've always done, right? We find a brand we trust, a pound test that feels right, and we stick with it. It's a habit. But in fishing, comfortable habits can be costly. And this specific habit is the reason so many of us go home empty-handed when the water gets cold. We're fighting a battle we can't win because our most critical piece of equipment is actively working against us. We assume the line performs the same year-round, but the laws of physics have other plans, and it's time we paid attention to them. Let's start with the invisible problem. Picture this. It's 34 degrees out, so cold you can see your breath. The wind is biting. You make a perfect cast right next to a deep rock pile, and your lure begins its slow descent. You're focused, watching your line, waiting for that subtle tick that signals a bite. But the line itself has changed. It's no longer the supple, sensitive connector to your lure that it was back in the summer. The cold has transformed it into a stiff, coiled memory of the spool it just left. This isn't just a minor inconvenience, it's a fundamental breakdown in the communication between you and the fish. You think you're in tune with your bait, but you're actually holding a disconnected phone line. The fish could be down there whispering secrets, but your line is too rigid and noisy to transmit the message. That's the invisible enemy we're tackling today. Now let's get into a term you've heard 1,000 times, line memory. In warm weather, it's mostly just an annoyance. You give the line a good stretch, and it more or less behaves. But in the cold, line memory isn't an annoyance. It's a crippling disease for your fishing. Imagine pulling a spring from an old pen and trying to lay it perfectly flat on a table. It constantly wants to coil back up, right? That is exactly what your standard monofilament or fluorocarbon line is doing in water below 40 degrees. These coiling loops create slack, but it's not a gentle, manageable slack. It's a stiff, resistant slack. A lethargic winter bass can pick up your jig, move 2 inches with it, and spit it out. And those stiff coils will just absorb the entire event like tiny shock absorbers. You will never, ever know it happened. Okay, it's time to bust a big, expensive myth. We all love fluorocarbon, right? It's practically invisible, it's tough as nails, and it sinks, which helps get those finesse baits down. It's marketed as the magic line. But here's the hard truth. In freezing water, standard fluorocarbon can be one of the absolute worst offenders for stiffness. By its nature, it's a harder, denser material than monofilament. When that temperature plummets, its rigidity increases exponentially. I've been out on the lake in January and seen guys fishing with heavy pound test fluoro that looks more like weed whacker string coming off the spool. They are convinced they have the ultimate stealth presentation, but in reality, they're fishing with a rigid guitar string that couldn't transmit a bite if a giant walleye hit it with a sledgehammer. Not all fluoros are created equal, and your favorite summer flipping line is almost certainly your worst winter nightmare. So now you're probably thinking, all right, fine, I'll just switch back to good old monofilament. It's generally more flexible and forgiving, isn't it? And yes, that's true to a point, but it is not immune to the cold. Monofilament has a tendency to absorb a small amount of water. As that water temperature gets close to freezing, the line itself starts to become more brittle and stiff. It's definitely more manageable than many standard fluorocarbons in the cold, but that dreaded memory issue is still very real, especially with heavier lines. A thicker diameter mono, say 12 or 15-pound test, will still come off your spinning reel in wide, unmanageable loops. This kills your casting distance, but far more importantly, it destroys your sensitivity. The line isn't laying straight between your rod tip and the lure, which creates a massive dead zone for bite detection. Let's visualize the actual bite we're trying to feel. In winter, a fish's metabolism slows way, way down. They aren't chasing and smashing a lure like they do in May. The bite is often just a slight change in pressure, a subtle tick, or the line just suddenly feels heavy or mushy. It's incredibly faint. Now imagine that delicate signal has to travel up a fishing line that's full of stiff, resistant coils. Those coils act like the suspension on a monster truck. The initial faint signal, the very thing you're waiting for, gets completely dampened out and absorbed by the coils before it ever has a chance to reach your sensitive rod tip. The fish has already sampled your lure, detected that something is wrong, and ejected it. You're just sitting there, freezing, waiting for a solid thump that will never come because your line physically filtered out the only information you were going to get. This is where braided line enters the conversation, and for good reason. Braid has virtually zero memory. It stays limp, supple, and manageable even in the most frigid, miserable temperatures. This is a massive advantage over mono and fluoro. It will lay straight in the water, giving you a direct, uncompromised connection to your lure. And because it has zero stretch, every little rock, weed, and, most importantly, every subtle bite is transmitted instantly up the line to your hand. On paper, it sounds like the perfect solution, doesn't it? Well, there's a catch, and for anyone who has fished in truly freezing weather, it's a big one. Braid, by its woven nature, absorbs water like a sponge. In below freezing air temperatures, that absorbed water freezes within the fibers of the line. Your rod guides will ice up in seconds, and the line itself can become a single, frozen, rigid mess that can barely pass through the guides at all. So how do we get the incredible sensitivity and manageability of braid without the nightmare of it freezing solid? There are two main approaches that seasoned cold water anglers use. First, many great companies now make lines specifically coated to repel water, often marketed as ice braid or something similar. These special coatings work wonders and significantly reduce water absorption and freeze-up. They are a fantastic option and my first choice for fishing with braid when the air is below 32 degrees. The second, and perhaps more common approach, is to use braid as your main line, but add a leader of a more cold weather-friendly material. This setup can give you the best of both worlds, the sensitivity and low memory of braid for the majority of your line, combined with a nearly invisible and more manageable connection to your lure. But the choice of that leader material is absolutely crucial. If you're going to use a leader with your braid in the cold, you cannot just grab your standard spool of summer fluorocarbon. If you do that, you'll be right back where you started, with a stiff, coily section of line right where it matters most, at the business end. You have to actively seek out lines specifically marketed for cold weather or ice fishing. These are often specially formulated copolymers or fluorocarbons that are designed to remain supple and manageable at low temperatures. They might have a slightly larger diameter for their given strength, or maybe a little more stretch, but the trade-off for better handling and vastly improved sensitivity is absolutely worth it. It makes no sense to build a perfect system with braid and then compromise it at the finish line with a stiff, inappropriate leader. Another critical adjustment for successful cold water fishing is to embrace the downsizing principle. You need to forget about that 20-pound test line you were using to pull 5-pound bass out of heavy summer slop. In the winter, most of that vegetation has died back and the water is often much clearer than it is in the summer. A lighter line, say 6 or 8-pound test, is not only less visible to wary fish, but much more importantly for our discussion, it's inherently more flexible and supple. A thinner piece of material simply has less mass, so it's less prone to getting stiff and holding memory. It will cast better, have less memory, and it will allow your tiny finesse baits to have a much more natural, unimpeded action in the water. This is one of the simplest changes you can make, and it has a massive impact on your success. Don't just take my word for it. You can and should test this for yourself. It's a simple experiment that will make you a believer. Take one of your favorite summer reels, the one spooled with your standard 12-pound line, and stick it in your home freezer for about 20 or 30 minutes. And don't worry, it won't hurt the reel at all. Then take it out and try to pull some line off the spool. Pay attention to how it feels. See how stiff and coily it is, how it fights you. Now, do the exact same thing with a reel spooled with a quality line specifically designed for ice fishing. The difference will be like night and day. One will feel like a piece of wire, and the other will still feel like fishing line. This simple 10-minute experiment will teach you more than 1,000 words from me ever could. This entire stiffness problem is far more pronounced on spinning gear than it is on baitcasting gear. Think about the mechanics of it. The line on a spinning reel has to come off the spool in coils. If those coils are stiff and full of memory, they create a massive amount of friction as they slap through the rod guides, which absolutely kills your casting distance with light lures. They also create that awful sensitivity-robbing slack we talked about. On a baitcaster, the line comes off the spool straight. While a stiff line is still less sensitive and harder to manage on a baitcaster, it's a slightly less dramatic problem. This is why you'll see many serious winter anglers switching to lighter-powered baitcasting setups, often called BFS, or bait finesse systems, just to avoid the coiling nightmare of a stiff line on a spinning reel. And here's something most people never consider. It's not just about feeling bites. It's about your lure's action. We spend so much time and money picking the perfect lure with the perfect subtle action, a little hair jig that needs to quiver, or a drop shot bait that needs to dance seductively in place. Now imagine connecting that delicate lure to a stiff, unyielding piece of line. That line is now restricting the lure's movement. It's like trying to waltz while wearing a full suit of armor. The line's inherent stiffness dampens the lure's natural action. A bait that should be subtly quivering is instead being dragged unnaturally through the water. The fish sees this, senses that it's wrong, and simply swims away. Your line is actively sabotaging your entire presentation before a fish even gets a chance to bite it. Many of us, especially guys who fish around a lot of rocks, docks, or wood, default to a heavy, abrasion-resistant line. We prioritize not breaking off a fish over everything else. And that makes perfect sense in the summer when fish are aggressive and burying themselves in heavy cover. But in the winter, you have to completely shift your priorities. The number one priority is simply getting a bite in the first place. What good is a line that will never break if its stiffness prevents you from ever feeling the fish that's on it? It's 100 times better to hook 5 fish on a lighter, more supple line and maybe lose one to a snag than to never hook any fish at all on your super tough line. You can't land a fish you never knew was there. So what specific materials should you be looking for on the store shelf? When you're buying line for winter, you need to read the packaging carefully. Look for lines that are specifically listed as copolymers or have special winter or ice formulations. Copolymers are blends of different nylons and other materials specifically engineered by chemists to balance strength, sensitivity, and most importantly, flexibility in the cold. Some fluorocarbon lines are also made with a much softer formula. They'll often be marketed as having low memory or high suppleness. The companies that have put in the research and development to solve this problem will be proud to tell you about it right on the box. Don't just grab the same old spool out of habit. Be a discerning customer and choose the right tool for the job. Here's a simple visual cue you can watch for the next time you're on the water. After you make a cast with a light lure, watch the line as it lays on the water's surface before it sinks. Does it lay in big, open, ugly coils that refuse to straighten out? That is the signature of a stiff, high-memory line. A good, supple, cold-weather line will straighten out much more easily with just the minimal weight of your lure pulling on it. This is a direct visual indicator of how much slack and memory you're dealing with between your rod tip and your bait. If your line looks like a slinky laying on the water, you have a major problem. That visual cue is your first and most obvious warning that you're probably not going to feel a subtle winter bite. Now, a temporary fix, but one that can certainly help on those borderline days, is using a line conditioner. There are several good brands on the market that come in a small spray bottle. Before you head out, or even while you're on the water, you can spray it directly on your spool of line. These products are essentially lubricants that coat the line, which helps it cast smoother and reduces some of that friction-induced memory and stiffness. Now, it won't magically transform a wire-stiff fluorocarbon into a supple braid, but on a day where the temps are hovering around freezing, or with a line that's just a little bit stiff, it can make a very noticeable difference in manageability and casting distance. Think of it as a useful tool in the toolbox, not a magic bullet solution. This is a simple, mechanical tip that a lot of people overlook, but it helps. When you're spooling up a new line for winter use, especially mono or fluoro, don't pack it onto the reel under extreme tension. A lot of guys think they need to crank it on there super tight to prevent loops, but all you're doing is preloading that memory into the line and stretching it. When you put the line on with just enough tension to lay it on the spool evenly and smoothly, you're giving it a much better chance to relax. This allows it to come off the reel more smoothly later, with less memory, when you're out in the cold. A little bit of mechanical sympathy during your prep work at home can pay big dividends on the water. Trust me. Let's make the economic argument for a moment. Think about the money you spend on a single fishing trip. The gas for your truck, the gas for the boat, bait, maybe you buy a new $5 lure or two. It all adds up to a significant investment. Now imagine that your entire investment of time and money is being completely negated by a $15 spool of the wrong line. It's the definition of being penny-wise and pound-foolish. Spending a little bit extra on a dedicated, high-quality cold water line isn't an expense. It's an investment in the success and enjoyment of every single winter trip you take. It's the one single thing that connects you to the fish and determines whether the rest of your investment pays off. Don't cheap out on your connection. Finally, let's not forget the confidence factor. Fishing is as much a mental game as it is a physical one, maybe even more so. If you're out there freezing your butt off and you have zero confidence in your setup, you're going to fish poorly. It's inevitable. You won't pay as close attention. You'll start second-guessing every little bump or feeling. But when you know for a fact that your line is perfectly suited for the conditions, when you know it's limp, sensitive, and giving you a true picture of what your lure is doing down there, your confidence absolutely soars. You focus better. You anticipate the bite. And that mental edge that comes from trusting your gear is often the real difference between getting skunked and having a successful day on the ice or water. I'll leave you with a final practical example that happened to me. I was out with a buddy last winter. We were fishing the same spot, throwing the same lures on nearly identical rod and reel setups. For an hour, I was consistently catching fish, just little taps, one after another, and he wasn't getting a thing. He was getting visibly frustrated, blaming the spot, the lure color, the wind, everything under the sun. I finally asked to see his setup. He was using a heavy, stiff fluorocarbon that he uses for flipping docks in the summer. I snipped off his lure, tied on a short 2-foot leader of my soft 6-pound test ice line, and handed it back. On his very next cast, his eyes went wide. He felt that tick and set the hook. The look on his face said it all. It wasn't the fish, it was the line, it was the messenger that had been failing him all day long. So let's wrap this all up. We've talked about how cold makes your line stiff, how that stiffness creates memory and slack, and how that slack completely masks the subtle bites of lethargic winter fish. We've gone over why your summer favorites might be your worst winter enemies. The biggest takeaway, the real aha moment here, is that your line isn't just a string, it's a communication device, and using the wrong one in the cold is like trying to have a whispered conversation next to a running jet engine. The message is being sent, but the equipment is incapable of receiving it. This changes everything because it shifts the blame from The fish aren't biting to my gear isn't letting me feel the bite. That's a problem you can actually solve. It empowers you to take control of your success instead of just hoping for a dumb, aggressive fish to hook itself. Thank you for sticking with me through this. I really hope it helps you put more fish in the boat this winter. If you found this useful, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you don't miss the next video. And now I really want to know from you, what's the one line you swear by for cold water, and what's the one you'll never ever use again? Drop your answers in the comments below. Let's get a good discussion going and help each other out. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you on the water.